And as the world continues quietly, unchanged, there is no sense of beginning and no sense of ending, only a slow, endless unfolding that does not ask to be followed. Gaia remains below, steady, supportive, unmoving. Uranus stretches above, wide, distant, unbroken, and between them, everything rests in a quiet balance that has never needed to be questioned. Time moves, but not in a way that can be measured. Not in seconds, not in hours, but in something softer, something slower, something that does not pass, but simply deepens. And within that deepening, there is a subtle shift, so quiet, it could almost be missed. Nothing changes all at once. Nothing arrives suddenly. Instead, there is a sense of something forming gradually, as if it had always been there, waiting to take shape. And from that quiet becoming, the Titans emerge, not as figures stepping forward, not as forms arriving, but as presences that slowly come into awareness, like shapes revealed through mist. Oceanus is the first to be felt, not seen, not defined, but sensed as something vast, something without edge, something that stretches far beyond where attention can reach. There is no beginning to him, no boundary, no end, only a continuous, gentle expansion, like water that does not move, yet is never still, and near him, though not separate, chaos begins to form. Where Oceanus expands outward, chaos remains still, centered, quiet, like a thought that has settled and no longer needs to be examined. There is no movement in him, no urgency, only a presence that simply exists without question. And as these presences settle, others begin to follow. Creus, steady, anchored, like something that holds without needing to be seen. Hyperion, softly radiant, not bright, not sharp, but warm, like light that exists even when eyes are closed. Iapetus, distant, subtle, carrying something quiet through time without needing to reveal it. Each one not separate, not competing, not defined by action, but simply present. And together they form something new, not a change, not a disruption, but an expansion of what already is. And among them, without drawing attention, without standing apart, Cronus begins to take shape. He is not different. Not at first. He is part of the same stillness, the same quiet unfolding, the same slow rhythm that moves through everything. But time continues, and within time there are moments that do not feel like moments, moments that do not announce themselves, moments that do not stand out, but that quietly change everything. And somewhere within that slow passage, Cronus begins to feel not separate, but aware. Not aware in a way that thinks, not aware in a way that questions, but aware like a shift in air, like a subtle change that does not need to be understood. Uranus remains above, endless, unbroken, close, always close, and Gaia remains below, still, patient, enduring, and between them, everything continues as it always has. But something within that closeness begins to feel as though it could soften, as though it could open, as though it could change, not because it must, not because it is forced, but because everything eventually moves. And in that quiet awareness, a space begins to form. Not a space that is taken, not something created suddenly, but something allowed. A gentle separation, a soft release, a widening that does not disturb, but simply becomes. And within that becoming, Cronus moves, not quickly, not forcefully, not with intention, but with a kind of still certainty, as if the moment had already happened, as if everything had already shifted, and he is simply aligning with it. And as that alignment settles, Uranus begins to fade, not gone, not lost, but distant, like something once close that no longer needs to remain. And as that distance grows, the space between things widens, breathes, softens, and the world, which once felt enclosed, begins to open. Nothing rushes in. Nothing fills the space. It simply exists, quiet, endless, unclaimed. And within that openness, everything continues. And within that openness, nothing rushes to fill it. Nothing reaches outward. Nothing gathers. It simply remains wide, still, unclaimed. And within that stillness, Cronus remains, not above the others, not set apart, not yet defined, simply present. And time continues, not forward, not in steps, but deeper, like something settling, layer by layer, without end. And within that deepening, the presence of Cronus begins to change, not outwardly, not in a way that can be seen, but inwardly, like something aligning, like something finding its place. Without effort, the titans remain as they are. Oceanus continues endlessly, without edge. It is said that all rivers, all waters, all distant seas flow from him, but he does not guide them. He does not call them. They simply belong. Chaos remains still, a quiet center, a presence of knowing that does not need to be spoken. He does not ask. He does not search. He simply holds. The stillness in which understanding exists. Cronus remains beneath everything, unseen, unmoving. A quiet foundation, holding what does not need to be noticed. Hyperion continues to glow, softly, not bright, not sharp, but constant. A warmth that exists without asking to be seen. And Iapetus remains distant, carrying something quiet through time, something not yet revealed, something that will unfold long after this moment has passed. And together, they do not act, they do not change the world, they simply remain within it. And for a time, that is enough. For a time, everything rests. Nothing rises, nothing falls, nothing begins, nothing ends. Only a continuous, unbroken presence, and within that presence, Cronus settles more deeply, more completely, as though the stillness itself has chosen him, as though he has become the quiet center around which everything rests. Time continues, but now it gathers around him, not held, not controlled, but shaped softly, like something guided, without being touched. And in this way, Cronus becomes known, not through action, not through force, but through presence. The one who holds time, the one through whom everything passes, the one within whom nothing needs to hurry. And in his quiet reign, the world remains at ease. It is said that this was a time of calm, a time when nothing struggled, a time when nothing was required to become anything more than it already was. The earth gave freely, not because it was asked, not because it was forced, but because nothing resisted, nothing held back. And in that openness, everything was provided. There was no hunger, no sense of lack, no need to reach for anything beyond what already existed. Time did not press forward. It did not demand change. It simply held. And within that holding, everything remained in quiet balance. The Titans did not rule. They did not command. They existed. And the world existed with them in a state that did not need to be questioned, in a rhythm that did not need to be followed, in a stillness did not need to be broken. And within that stillness, even thought begins to soften. Even awareness begins to settle, as though the world itself has entered a kind of rest, a deep, endless, unmoving rest. And yet, time continues, always, even here, even now, and within that endless quiet, something begins again, not suddenly, not as a disruption, but as something so gentle it could almost be missed. A small shift, a quiet movement beneath the surface of everything. Cronus remains, but something within that stillness begins to loosen, not break, not disappear, but soften, as though the space he holds no longer needs to remain so complete, as though something else can begin to share it. And in that softening, a space begins to open, not wide, not sudden, but enough, just enough for something new to begin. And within that small opening, something begins to take form, not all at once, not fully, but gently, as everything has before it. And within that quiet space, another presence begins to emerge. Rhea, not separate from the world, not set apart, but part of the same unfolding. A presence of continuity, a presence that does not hold, but allows. Where Cronus settles, Rhea moves, not in distance, not in direction, but in feeling, like a quiet current moving beneath still water. And together, they do not create something new. They continue something that has always been. And within that continuation, life begins to take shape, not quickly, not with urgency, but slowly, as though time itself has decided to become visible. And from that slow becoming, the first of their children arrives, Hestia, not as a figure stepping forward, but as a presence, warm, steady, quietly holding space, a still center, like the feeling of home before it is understood. And she remains, not moving outward, but gathering inward, holding something calm within everything that surrounds her. And as she settles, another presence follows. Demeter, soft, grounded, a quiet abundance, like something that gives without being asked, like the earth before it is named, and within her presence there is a sense of nourishment, a quiet offering that asks for nothing in return. And time continues, always. And from that same quiet unfolding, Hera arrives, not with force, not with demand, but with a kind of quiet structure, a presence of order that does not need to control, a sense of balance that exists without being held. And within her, there is stillness, a stillness that does not move, but holds. And then another presence, Hades, deep, not dark in a way that frightens, but deep in a way that settles, like the quiet beneath everything, like the space where things return when they are no longer needed, and he remains without calling attention, without asking to be understood. And then Poseidon, not restless, not forceful, but vast, like Oceanus, but closer, like something that moves without urgency, something that shifts without needing to arrive anywhere. And within him there is motion, but gentle, endless. And as each of these presences emerges, they do not separate from the world. They do not stand apart from Cronus. They remain within him, held, not confined, not taken, but contained, as though time itself has gathered them inward, as though everything that begins returns to the place from which it came. And within this holding, there is no struggle, no resistance, only a quiet cycle that does not need to be understood. Rhea feels this, not as concern, not as fear, but as something that does not quite settle, like a quiet awareness that something is not meant to remain this way, not wrong, but unfinished. And within that awareness, something begins to shift, not quickly, not all at once, but gently, like something preparing without needing to act. And time continues, always, and from that same quiet unfolding, another presence begins, not yet seen, not yet formed, but already present. Zeus, not arriving suddenly, not entering the world, but becoming slowly, as everything has before him. And within that becoming, there is space, a space that was not there before, a space that does not belong to Cronus, a space that remains open. And within that openness, Zeus begins to grow, not in size, not in strength, but in presence, like something becoming clearer, without moving, like something coming into awareness, without being called. And Rhea quietly holds that space, not hiding, not protecting, but allowing something to exist outside of what has always been. And in that allowance, everything begins to shift, not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a new breath entering a space that has long been still. And within that breath, the world prepares, not for change, but for continuation. A continuation that has always been coming, even in the stillness, even in the quiet, even in the long, unbroken rest of time. And within that quiet space, Zeus continues, not growing in a way that can be measured, not moving from one state to another, but becoming more present, more defined, without ever needing to take form. He does not rush forward. He does not seek anything. He simply exists. And in that existence, something begins to settle around him. A quiet field, a space that feels open, unheld, different from what has come before. And within that space, there is ease, a kind of stillness that does not hold, a kind of presence that does not contain. And as Zeus continues, that space deepens, not expanding outward, but softening inward, allowing, always allowing. And far from that quiet unfolding, Cronus remains, still, unchanged, holding everything that has come before. The Titans remain. Oceanus continues to stretch endlessly. Chaos remains centered. Creus holds steady. Hyperion glows softly. Iapetus remains distant. And within Cronus, those who came after still rest, not moving, not separate, held within time itself. And for a moment, that stillness remains complete, unbroken, undisturbed. But time continues, always, even now. And within that quiet continuation, something begins to shift. Not within Zeus alone, not within Cronus alone, but within the space between them. A subtle widening, a gentle distance, not separation, but openness, as though the world itself has begun to breathe, as though something once held has begun to release. And within that release, Zeus becomes clearer, still not defined, still not separate, but present, a presence that does not hold, a presence that does not gather, a presence that allows. And as that presence settles, the world does not change all at once. Nothing breaks, nothing falls away. Everything continues, but differently, more softly, more openly, as though the quiet weight of time has begun to lift, not gone, but lighter. And within that lightness, the space between things grows, not in distance, but in feeling. And as that space grows, those who were once held begin to stir, not awakening, not rising, but becoming aware. Hestia, still warm, still centered, begins to feel that openness. Demeter, still giving, still grounded, begins to soften into it. Hera, still steady, still balanced, begins to rest within it. Hades, deep, quiet, unchanging, remains, but now within a space that feels wider. Poseidon, vast, gentle, endless, begins to move, not outward, but freely. And within that quiet shift, nothing is taken, nothing is forced, nothing is undone. Everything simply begins to exist in a new way, and Cronus remains. But the stillness he once held no longer holds everything, not completely, not entirely. And in that subtle change, there is no loss, only transition, a quiet continuation of what has always been. And as Zeus remains within that open space, he does not step forward. He does not claim. He does not take. He simply is. And in that presence, everything begins to align, not through action, not through movement, but through something quieter, something that does not need to be seen, something that simply becomes. And within that becoming, the balance shifts so gently it could almost be missed. And yet, it changes everything. The world feels lighter, more open, more at rest, as though something long held has finally been allowed to soften. And within that softness, everything continues, not as it was before, but not entirely new, something in between, a quiet transition that does not ask to be followed, that does not need to be understood, that simply unfolds. And as it unfolds, Zeus remains, not above, not below, but within, part of the same quiet field that holds everything. And in that field, nothing needs to be done. Nothing needs to be finished. Nothing needs to be changed, because everything is already continuing. And as that quiet shift continues, nothing breaks, nothing falls away, nothing is taken. Everything remains, and yet it does not feel the same. The presence of the Titans still surrounds everything, Oceanus continues endlessly, without edge. Cronus remains still, centered, unchanging. Cronus holds quietly beneath everything that rests above. Hyperion glows softly, without brightness, without demand. Iapetus remains distant, carrying something quiet through time, and Cronus remains. But the stillness he once held no longer gathers everything into itself. It no longer contains. It no longer encloses. It softens gently, like something loosening after a long, unbroken rest. And within that softening, space continues to open, not wide, not suddenly, but enough, just enough for everything to breathe. And as that quiet breath moves through the world, those who were once held begin to settle into their own presence. Hestia, no longer only within, becomes the quiet center within everything. A still warmth, a gentle place where nothing needs to move. Demeter continues to give, not from within, but outward, a soft abundance that does not need to be gathered, that does not need to be held, only received. Hera remains steady, but now her balance exists within the open world, not contained, not enclosed, simply present. Hades remains deep, unchanged, but now his depth belongs to a space that feels endless, not hidden, not distant, but part of everything. And Poseidon continues his quiet motion, not restless, not driven, but free, moving gently through the same space that has begun to widen. And as each of them settles, nothing separates, nothing pulls away. Everything remains connected, but differently, more softly, more openly, as though the world itself has learned to release. And within that release, Cronus remains, not gone, not diminished, but no longer the center, no longer the still point around which everything rests. Instead, he becomes something else, something quieter, something more distant, like time that continues without needing to be noticed, like something that holds everything without needing to contain it. And in that quiet transformation, there is no loss, only continuation, only a soft, endless unfolding that does not need to be followed. And within that unfolding, Zeus remains, not rising, not claiming, not taking, simply present, a presence that does not hold, a presence that does not gather, a presence that allows. And in that allowance, everything finds its place, not assigned, not chosen, but settled naturally, as though it had always been waiting to become this way. And as the world continues, nothing rushes forward, nothing calls attention to itself, nothing needs to begin, nothing needs to end. Everything simply rests in a new balance, a balance that is not held, a balance that does not need to be maintained, a balance that exists because nothing resists it. And within that quiet harmony, the echoes of what came before begin to soften, not disappearing, not lost, but distant, like something remembered without needing to return. And within that distance, there is peace, a quiet understanding that nothing has been taken, nothing has been undone. Everything continues exactly as it should. And as that understanding settles, the world grows still again, not as it was before, but deeper, softer, more open, as though everything has finally found its place. And within that place, nothing is required, nothing is expected, nothing needs to be followed, because everything is already continuing. And as everything settles, there is nothing more that needs to be followed. The world remains as it is, open, quiet, unhurried. The presence of the Titans softens into the distance, not gone, not lost, but resting far beyond where attention needs to reach. Cronus, no longer holding everything close, continues quietly, like time itself, moving without needing to be noticed. And Zeus remains, not above, not separate, but within the same quiet space that holds everything gently in place. And between them, everything continues softly, endlessly, without asking anything of you. Nothing calls you forward. Nothing asks to be understood. Nothing needs to be remembered. The story does not need to continue. Not now, not here, because this moment is enough. Everything that needed to unfold has already unfolded. Everything that needed to settle has already found its place, and everything that continues will do so without needing your attention. And you can remain here in this quiet space where nothing is expected, where nothing is required, where everything simply is. And as you rest here, you may begin to notice your breath, not changing it, not guiding it, simply noticing the slow rise and the gentle fall, unforced, steady, easy, and with each breath, there is nothing to hold, nothing to carry forward, nothing to return to, only this quiet rhythm moving on its own. And as that rhythm continues, you may begin to notice the stillness around you and within you, a quiet space that does not need to be filled, a softness that does not need to be explained, a calm that does not need to be held. And within that calm, thoughts may begin to drift, not stopping, not disappearing, but softening like distant echoes, fading without needing to be followed. And as they soften, the edges of things begin to blur. Time becomes less clear, less important, less defined. And in that softness, there is nothing left left to do, nothing left to finish, nothing left to understand. Only this moment, only this quiet, only this gentle sense of everything settling exactly where it belongs. And as everything remains unchanging, you can allow yourself to drift slowly, easily, without effort, as if carried by the same quiet rhythm that shaped everything from the very beginning. And with each breath, you can sink a little deeper, a little further into stillness, a little further into rest, as though the space beneath you is softening, holding you, supporting you, without needing anything in return. And there is nowhere else to go, no next moment to reach for, no place that requires your attention. Only this, only now, only this quiet unfolding that continues on its own. And if the story continues beyond this, it will do so quietly, without needing you to follow, because you can remain here in the stillness, in the calm, in the quiet space where everything is already enough. And as the world continues, softly, endlessly, you can allow yourself to rest, to drift, to let go without effort, without thought, without needing anything to change. And in that gentle letting go, everything settles softly, endlessly, as you rest